Sorry guys, if you have any questions, you can let me know. In the previous sessions, we spoke about introduction till connectivity, condition scripts, and global variables. How do we do a control execution of the job? And today we'll be talking about single user instance and multi-user instance. How do they work out in the environment, and how do we configure them, and how do we act like an independent consultant in a single user instance or as a team member in a multi-user instance, how both are different, and what has to be done for you to enable a multi-user environment, what is a central repository. So this is altogether a very big concept, and you have 6 to 8 questions in your SAP BODS certification on just this concept, central repository, and sorry. And this is pretty much important for the interviews because working with the central repository is something that is mandatory in the projects, and everybody will be working on the central repositories, and only the insiders like who worked on the projects will know in and out of the central repository. So that will be a fetching point for your interviews. And second one is code promotions. Right, code promotions, when you move the code from local to central repositories and then from development to quality environment, these are very important. Those really help us to talk correct things in the interviews. Alright, so the code promotions, especially when we do from development to QA and from QA to central production, how do you work on this, which teams get involved, and how do you do these code promotions, and what is mandatory. So we will see what is the architecture for this one, and how do you set up the architecture. This is the main part of any BODS project. And how do you access or use the central repository and different authentications and securities on this one. So to start with, let us start with the single user instance. So single user instance is a project scenario where only you'll be working on POCs. Right, you have only one person to work on the project, and you will be working on your proof of concepts, or you call them as pilot projects, and there will be one BODS developer, one local repository, and you'll have one or more sources, and then you'll have one or more targets, and you have to load the data, extract the data from your source and load it into your target. And this will be your development, production, and quality environments. Right, I'll tell you how that works out. So this is your source, right, and this is your target, right, and let us say this 2 boxes are my development data, and this is my quality source, right, and this is my production data. Alright, so initially what we do, we connect to the development system, extract the data from that, and load this development data into my target environment. Right, this is what data services does: extraction, transformation, and loading. And once the development is done, what is the general scenario? We move from development landscape to quality landscape and then rerun the jobs. We move our codes from development to quality, and then there we will rerun our jobs. So instead of having one more environment, since this is your POC or this is a small project, we also call them as small and medium enterprises. Right, Satyaraj, can you be on mute? Just to avoid the backend noises, please. If you have any question, you can unmute and ask your question. Thank you so much. Right, so what we will do the extraction, transformation, and loading using BODS, and load the data into my development, into my target development environment. right? This is one phase. We call them as small and medium enterprises, SME projects. Now, once the development is done, so generally when you work on the development, you will be working on not that great data. So quality systems will be generally the replica of your production systems, but you will not be updating them quite often. So once your development is done, the next way or next thing that we will do is we need to point our systems to the quality system. So instead of moving our code from development environment to a quality environment, we'll have only one environment in BODS, and using BODS concept called as data store configurations, we will point entire data stores from development to your QA box, right? So they will extract the data from QA and then they will write the data into your target QA system. Now, when I say connecting to your QA source or QA box, we have something called as data stores, right? So these data stores point to your external systems. We created some of them in our scenarios. We have your source, target, SAP data stores. So now let us say initially when I created these data stores, all these data stores are pointing to my development system. So instead of creating separate data stores for my quality and production, I will configure or add additional configurations to these data stores so that they can point to the quality system and also they can point to your production system. Right, so this will be a pretty easy concept. There will be no need for a code promotion or maintaining a separate environment, which is again a cost on the customers. So when you are working on small projects, instead of doing code promotion or another server, quality server maintenance, so you can directly configure your data stores to point to your quality system, extract the data, and load the data into your production system. And once your quality activity is done, then you will be pointing to your production source data from one or multiple sources, and from there you'll be loading that into your production environment. Right, this is how your data store configurations work. Okay, so now let us say I have a source data store, then I have a target data store, and let us say I have another source called as SAP. So I have an SAP data store, and you also have some methodologies and best practices which teach you to actually build your entire job in bits and pieces so that you can improve your performance. So we'll look at that a bit later, but you'll have some staging data stores to stage the intermediate data, and you'll have your lookup data stores if in case you are trying to do some lookup activity on your data. Now, when you have these many data stores, right, so instead of creating another set for, let us say these are your development data stores, instead of creating another set for QA and production, we are trying to create system configurations, right? Again, so I will create a configuration for development, and then I'll create configuration for QA, and I'll create a configuration for production. Then we have something called as a system configurations. So these system configurations help me to bind all the data store configurations in one go, rather than changing it individual data store level. So I can just change one configuration and it will bind all the data store configurations to development. Likewise, I can do for quality and production. So instead of doing changes at the data store level, I can directly set them to the system configuration. So first thing that we'll be looking at is a data store configuration, and the second thing is your system configurations. So now let us start with your data store configurations. How do your data stores work? So data stores are nothing but your windows that will allow you to connect to the external world or external sources, right? Let it be your source or target. We created these data stores. Now, if I want to create additional configurations on these data stores, so to create that one, select creating additional configuration is nothing but allowing your data store to connect to your development, QA, and production systems. The same data store, instead of creating separate data store for dev, separate data store for QA, and separate data store for production, the same data store can be added with your configurations. So select your data store, click on edit, and now you go to advanced button, and this is where you see the word configurations. Right, so this is my configurations, and this is where we can go ahead and create additional configurations so that we can connect one configuration to development, one configuration to QA, and the other one to production. Now if you look at this configurations one, and there's an edit button next to it, you click on edit, and this will open your configurations window. So configurations for data store, DS, database, source. Now here you see this shortcut icons like create new configuration, copy, duplicate configuration, or rename a configuration, delete configuration. There are multiple buttons related to the configuration. We'll handle them one by one. So now let us create a duplicate configuration of what we have by this clicking on the second button. Click on duplicate configurations, and I created 2 duplicate configurations. Total 3 configs are available. Now select your configuration 1, and you have an option called rename configuration. You can do that, or you select your configuration, right click, and you have all the options that you see on the above menu bar. You have all these things here. So I renamed this as development QA and prod, right? And apart from that, we also have to go and change your server names. So this is my BODS development, and the second one is my QA, and the third one is my production, right? So now you see something additional here called as a default configuration. So if I'm working on a development instance, I can keep my development as a default configuration, right? So if you keep this QA as a default configuration, you have to keep this to yes, and all the remaining things will be turned to no, right? Likewise, you can go and switch this to yes, and QA and production will turn to no. So once you give all these credentials, just click on apply and OK. Now, instead of configuration 1, you see something called as development, because that is the default configuration that you have set in the backend. And now, instead of seeing configuration 1, you see
Rakesh?
configurations 3. Yes?
Rakesh? Yeah, default configuration is what?
So when you execute the job, the data store points to the default, this one, development, right? And when you change this to QA as a default configuration, right, when you are executing the job extracts the data from, or it utilizes the QA source credentials.
That is depend upon our interest.
Yeah, that is exactly on our interest.
Thank you.
Right, thanks. Alright, so once you give the configurations, just click on apply and OK, and I'll just repeat the same process for my target data store as well. Alright, edit this one, go to the configurations, edit, make a duplicate configuration twice, and go and rename the configuration. So just keep in mind, when you are renaming the configurations, you just make sure that you give the same configuration names for all the data stores, because later stages you need to bind them into a single set. Just do that in a bit. Right click on apply and OK. Now your default configuration is dev, and just click on apply. So make sure you click on apply. If you don't click on apply and directly click on OK, your configuration settings will not be saved and you'll be losing them. Alright, so the third data store, DSSAP, it will take a little longer time, but let us go ahead and create configurations for this. So rename the configurations. I'm just doing it thrice to make sure that you guys understand how to do this. For any source or any target data stores, you can go ahead and create configurations. And once you create your configurations, make sure you click on apply and OK to save the configurations. Apply and OK. Yeah, Adil, there's a question from Adil. The question is, does the data stores contain metadata and the structures? Yes, the data stores, actually, when you create a data store, you create the data store to connect to your source system, right? Which means it has your source system username, password, the server name, and how to connect to that one, what is the authentication mechanism, and along with that, on that source system, what are you trying to get from that source? The tables, the views, their metadata, and all these things. And similar manner, when you're trying to write data into your target, so you need to know your target system server names, username, and password, and along with that, what are the different tables or views or structures that you are trying to utilize on your target system. So those things need to be, or those things will be a part of your data stores. So along with your metadata and the structures, it will also have your server name to which you are connecting and the credentials and the additional informations or parameters that you need to pass on when you are trying to connect to your source, target, or backend staging data stores. Now we have these three data stores created with three set of configurations: dev, QA, and prod. Now, let us say when I'm going to execute my job, right? So as for the diagram, I told you that we can go and point initially to development, and once your development is done, then you can go and point to your QA, and once your quality is done, you can point to your production. So let us do that activity now. This is done with the help of data store configurations. Now, to do this activity, data store configurations, what you need to do is go to each and every data store and advanced button and make sure your development data store or development configurations is by default. So this is how I point all my data stores, my source and target data stores, to my development environment. So this is a bit, lengthy process. Just in case, as I mentioned, if you have more number of data stores, like your staging data store, your lookup data store, and as per the SAP best practices, we also will have ds underscore stage underscore init and ds underscore lkp underscore init. So when we are creating the staging tables or lookup tables, if we have any internal information, so we'll be saving those information in these init data stores. Right, these will be nothing but your backend database data stores. But instead of dumping the entire data in, because all your databases will have a particular limit, like if you look at the SQL Server databases, they'll have a limit of 4 GB, and you have to manually go and extend that. So instead of dumping everything in one particular database, you kind of create multiple databases and distribute your data so that you can just search for your internal information in one database, staged information in one database, lookups, entire lookup information in one database, and the final tables in a particular database. So manually going and changing the data store configurations for each and every data store is a lengthy process. Yes?
In BODS staging area means is the designer or something else?
So yeah, I'll just clarify that one. Good question, Chandra. So in BODS, when I say staging area, all right. So we spoke about this in the previous session. I'll do a quick recall because that will be really helpful. Because when I say staging, it is not the designer area, but when you extract the data, you can do all the activities within your data store itself. Like you can extract the data and then validate it, you can cleanse it, and then you can load it into your target. But you cannot do a reconciliation when you want to see what is extracted and what is loaded, because intermediately or in between these extraction, scoping, validation, enrichment, you're not saving a backup of the data. So to improve the performance, what we do is we kind of save the code backup so that every time your extraction is done, your memory is occupied and that is flushed with the staging. And this is pushed onto your backend database tables, which are recalled into your job, and validation is done. And once your validation is done, you have two output tables, valid and invalid. They are pushed back onto the backend database tables, and they are reutilized for your enrichment. And then you load the final data into your target system after enriching the data. So now if you want to go do a quick reconciliation, like let us say 1000 is loaded into my target. So how does this how do you arrive to this 1000? So we can do a quick reverse engineering, saying that okay, this 1000 record is an output of your validation, and scoping, so that record came through scoping into this one, or deduplication into the validation, and that is extracted from the source, and in source it is called as A123. So you can go and look at like how exactly A123 is converted into 1000. So that is where we use the backend SQL Server or Oracle databases as a staging databases. Is that clear?
So there is a separate database for staging area.
Yeah, actually we will use this SQL Server or Oracle as a backend databases along with data services. So this will be considered as a box when we are installing data services. So even when you are installing data services, you need a backend database on which you can install, because as per the nature of data services, it cannot hold even a single record. So when you want to create some user information, or when you want to create some jobs, all the information related to that should be saved in the backend database. So that is the reason why it is mandatory to use any databases like SQL or Oracle as a backend databases.
So in the environment like SAP BODS or on HANA, in that environment also we have these one of the database for backend for staging area.
No, you can see HANA itself is a database, and you have enough space on HANA system. You can use HANA as a backend database too.
Like yes, both. But other than source database and target database, we need another database for staging area.
Exactly, yeah, correct.
Okay, maybe database or instance.
Yeah, it can be an instance, or it can be a database, or it can be a persistence. So wherever you can push the data and call it back. But the thing is that if it is a database, you can also go and see, let us say I extracted 5,000 records from the source, and I'm doing a scoping saying that I need data for 2015 and 14. So in this scope, I got only 4,000 records, right? And after that, I did validation on the data, and out of which 4,000 records, only 3,000 are valid records, right? And after that, I did enrichment, and then again did a revalidation, and only 1,500 records are final valid, which are loaded into my target. Now, if you don't have any backend database tables or staging tables, and you did not capture all these records, you directly went ahead and created all the transformations directly within your job without backend staging. So now you'll be asked as a question, as a consultant, you'll be asked a question like, you extracted 5,000 records from my table and you loaded only 1,500. What happened to the another 3,500 records? So this actually will help us to do a quick reconciliation as well. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Chandra. Alright, so back to our topic. Now, if you want to go ahead and create a change individually at data store level, that will be a bit difficult, especially when you have so many data stores, right? So now, if you want to do it manually, you can go to each and every data store, edit, set the default configuration in the advanced button to dev, or click on edit, set the default configuration to yes. All data stores should point to the development systems, and click on apply. And now you go and run your job, and your job will run on your development instance. right? So this jobs will run on your development instance, but this is a painful act. You have to go and change for each and every data store. But there is one more concept called as system configurations, where you can bind all these things into one yes or no. All right, so you can bind all the QA data store configurations into one bundle. You can bind all the production configurations into one bundle, and you can bind all the development configurations into one bundle. So this is called as system configuration, a system level configuration. So when I get into my data services, sorry, Chandra, can you go on mute, please?
Yes, sure. Sorry.
Thank you. So when you get into your data services environment, this is my entire system level settings, right? These are my data store level settings. And if I want to do something at a system level so that, you know, all the data stores will bind to those rules. So those are called your system level configurations. To do your system configurations, you need to go to your tools and system configurations, right? So now, as of now, we don't have any configurations created, so you see this as an empty window. Now in the left corner, you have a button called as the create new configuration. So you call this as development, create one more configuration, call it as QA, and create one more configuration and call it as prod. Right, so we have all the three configurations created. Now if you go to each and every data store, this is my DB source data store. So click on the drop down and you will see the three data store configurations. Right, development, go to the second one, select development, and go to the third one, select development. So I'm binding all the development data store configurations into one system configuration called as development. Likewise, I can go and do that for QA. You have something called the substitution parameters. We'll talk about that a little later. We spoke about a quick introduction about substitution parameters, but we'll try to create some and look at them a little later. But now, as of now, our topic is to understand how a single user environment works, which means you have a single server, BODS server, on which you have a single repository, and you have to connect to different sources, different targets, and different environments at the source to different environments at the target. So you can go and create this system configurations, data store configuration, and system configuration. And now when you execute the job, you see something called as system configurations. So this is a new thing, right? Earlier it was not there. And you just created a data store configurations. When you go through the recording, just drag it back to some 10 seconds or 15 seconds. You will not see this system configuration when we executed this job before. But now here you have something called as development, production, and QA. So no matter what you set your data store configurations default to, right? So you go to edit, and on this one you set your data store configuration to yes as a QA. So this is what I'd like to ask. Okay, right, thanks. So now you set it to QA and click on apply, and okay, now one of your data store is in QA, the other two are in production or development. It really doesn't matter. So the first thing that the system will try to read is your system configurations, but not your data store configurations, right? So when you set these things to default, but your system configurations is the first priority, that your job at the time of execution, it will go and look at the system configuration, and if at the system configuration level all your data stores are set to dev, then it will go and pick development as your default source. If it is set to QA, it will take QA as your default source, and if it is set to prod, it will go and pick it from the production system as your default source. Right, so there is no server called BOIDS_QA. We just have only one server in the backend, so that is the reason why it's showing that error, and that's the reason why it took so long. Right, so but be very careful when you are dealing with this data store configurations. Not only you, but so many people will be using these data store configurations, right? So we should be very careful when we are using these things, because let us say, I'll show you a scenario, but just before that, Right, so this is how we execute the jobs and ask them to run in development. And next time when you want to execute them on a QA system, you just need to go and switch to QA or to the production. Right, but there is an empty space given. Can you guys guess why there is an empty space and what is the advantage of it? Now there is a trick of the trade that we generally get into this one once you work on the projects and once you start manipulating the tool without the customer's knowledge and you want to do something and complete your work pretty fast, you can do all these activities in your projects. So let us say there is a table that is present in yours.
A sandbox.
Sorry?
A sandbox?
Not only for sandbox, I'll tell you a scenario, Chandra, that we actually did for many customers without their knowledge, but yeah, that really saved our life and time. So let us say there is a table in your development, right? The same table is in your QA, and there will be definitely a troublemaker in your team who will go and screw up this one. So they will delete the entire data or spoil the data in this one. Now, if you are trying to load the data from QA to QA with your system configurations as QA, so the data that flows in is bad data, right? Somehow they go and spoil this table or they delete this table by mistake, right? So in those cases, what you need to do, you can't rely on the data or the table that is present in QA. You need to get the data from your development source and load it into your QA target, right? It is not development to development or QA to QA, it is development to QA. Right, sometimes your lookup table is not configured or created on your development and you are a bit pally with the data owners. They'll ask you, hey, why don't you go and utilize the table that is present in your development environment, right? So they will not create that in the QA. Right, let us say my material type, lookup material type is present in my development, but it is not present in my QA box. So they will say, it's already there, there's no update on that, why can't you utilize? So in those cases, you have to pull the information from for that data store from development and rest all the data stores from your QA source, a combination, a development environment and a QA environment, and load the data into your target QA to get the accurate results. So what you need to do is you have to set your lookup data store pointing to your development and remaining data stores pointing to your QA, right? Where do you do that? You do that in the data store configurations. So you set them as default, and at the time of executing the job, right, you select the system configurations to be blank, which means when the system configuration is blank, the default thing that the job server will take at the time of execution is data store's default configuration. Now this is pointing to my development, it will get the data from dev, and these two are pointing to my QA, so it will get the data and load the data into my QA systems. So this is how you can go and manipulate, but I was caught many times doing this because, my job is successfully completed, but the other people who are running their jobs on these data stores, they get bad results and they started raising alarms saying that, till yesterday it was running fine, but today it somehow got disturbed. So before somebody catch you, if you are trying to do this kind of an activity, once your job is done, just go and make sure that you set these data stores back to the default configuration so that it will not have an impact on the others. Right? We also suggested some customers, like, this is a common practice that we do in the data migration. If they want to overcome these kind of disturbances, they can also go and utilize the system configuration for their jobs too. Right, in their local repository, they can go and create the system configurations, and no matter who changes the data store configurations or who does or who is currently changing them and running them, it will not really consider. It will go and select whatever is default here in the system configuration. So this is how your single user environment work, right? So you might have a development source, your QA source, or targets, right? Or you might have multiple sources like Oracle, DB, and SQL, and you need to get one by one and load it into your target. So you can use this data store configurations and system configurations at any level or any scenarios. Going forward, once you start working on the project, you might you might face another 10 odd scenarios on which you have to use these configurations. But if we understand how exactly these works and how do you change them or how do you switch them, then depending on the scenario, you can go and utilize this data store configurations and talk about them in an interview. It's a sure shot that you can clear the interviews for sure, because nobody will be allowed to do the changes on the projects unless and until they are seniors and they have a very good knowledge on the tool. And generally, we will not let our junior folks know that there is an option like this, because we are worried that they can go and change and run anything and they can disturb the projects, right? So just to be on a safer side, we'll keep them on a blind side on these kind of configurations, or will not let the junior folks know that these kind of configurations are available on the system, so that they will not disturb it and the project will not get hit, right? But you can go and still change these things like the data store configurations and the system configurations, and then you can achieve what you are looking at in your projects, right? So this is your single user instance when you have only one person working on your project. So any question on or do you have any questions on your single user instance, data store configurations and system configurations?
Could you please explain these last one, Rakesh?
Which one?
The blank configuration.
The blank configuration, yeah. So when you are executing a job, so how to make your default system settings? How do you make the default system settings? So I'll get back to your question, Chandra. So Adil, when you are executing the job, you go to your tools. Before you execute your job, go to your tools and system configurations, and this is where I'm defaulting the configuration. So if I click on the drop down, so it will say default configuration. So instead of going for a default configuration, I'll select there, because the default configuration is the data store's default configuration. If it is QA, it will pick QA. If it is prod, it will pick prod. If it is dev, it will pick dev. So instead of letting the system choose, I'm defaulting it here. So this is where we default it. Is that clear, Adil? Yeah, perfect. Welcome. So next, Chandra's question. So Chandra asked me to talk about this blank system configuration, right? So when I'm selecting a blank system configuration, which means I don't have any say on which source and which target it should execute. So when I'm passing this as a blank, right, then the next level information where the configurations are present is at your data store level. If not at the system level, then the next level is data store level. So when you keep this blank, it will go and select what are the default data store configurations that are set in your data store level, and the job will run on it. So let us say, to talk about this as an example, I have some lookup information, lookup material type table, which is present in my development, and my material master data, which is present in my development. I created this job, I ran it successfully into my target, and all the materials are loaded into my development target. Now I have to repeat or rerun my job on my QA environment. So in QA, I have all my material tables, but one or two lookup tables are missing. Now I go and ask my data owner to create those things here. So as per the process, they have to provide you with the database tables. They have to create them here, and then you have to go and point your jobs to the QA environment and run. But over a period of time, you get a pally with your data owners or stuff, or your client side people, or if you are working on the client side, you cannot really force them to, unless and until you go and create this table here, I'm not going to run the job. You can't do that, right? So you have to use all the material source data tables from your QA environment, but somehow you have to use the lookup information from your development. So what you will do, you'll point your lookup data store to development as default, right? And the remaining data stores will point to your QA as default. Now, when I execute my job, what it will do, it will get the lookup information from my development environment and all the source and target tables from my QA to QA environment. So with this kind of an activity, I can get the lookup which is present in dev and run the job in QA environment. So this is kind of a manipulating thing that we will do on the projects just in case you are in an emergency or you don't have your tables available, but still you have to complete your task, right? So this is how you can switch. Now let us say I'm running in a production environment, and right, I set all this data store configuration, or I set my system default data store configuration, system configuration to production, and I'm trying to run my job, and there are some issues saying that these tables are not present or table or view does not exist. That is the error that you get when you run for some database tables that are not present in that database. So you know that that table is present in QA or development, but it is not present in your production on your lookup information. So what you do, you go and change this to as a default on your QA system. When you execute your job, for these lookup tables, it will be routed through your QA, and all the remaining tables will be routed through your production data store configurations. Okay, so this is how you can get the information from one system or one environment to another, especially when your tables are missing, but that is not a general case or a regular scenario, but this is a back-end thing that you generally do on each and every project. Is that clear, Chandra?
Fine. Thank you.
Yeah. But whenever you do this activity, just make sure that you set back your data store configurations to whatever the default configurations they are in, because so many jobs will be scheduled on them and all these things. So you also need to take care of your job scheduling activity. When jobs are running on a schedule, or in another 5 minutes you have some schedules, job scheduled on your data stores or on your local repository or some other local repository which are configured to these data stores, do not change them, right? You should make sure that you have a safe window where you can go and modify them and manipulate them, right? But make sure you set back to the normal or default configurations when your schedules are in place, right? So this is your single user instance, right? Let us say you talk about a multi-user instance. So the first thing that you'll understand is when you're talking about a multi-user instance, you have multiple people working on this project. So I have my developer 1, developer 2, developer 3, and then my QA guys, right? And my production support guys, and I will have an administrator, right? So I'll have so many people working on the project, right? Administrator, then I have developer 1, developer 2, developer 3, tester, and production support team. Now, let us say we are working on a finance project, and there are different jobs like accounts payable, accounts receivable, asset accounting, asset management, general ledger, right? So all these are my finance related jobs. Now what I will do, I'll ask these guys to work on accounts payable and accounts receivable and asset accounting, asset management, and general ledger. Now based on their seniority, I will give them, or based on their understanding on the module, their comfort zone, I give them their jobs. I distribute them and ask them to work. Now remember, this is my development box, and this is my QA box, and this is my production box. So in this scenario, we have 3 different landscapes, right? Your development, QA, and production, and you have multiple people working on your development, multiple testers, and a production support team, and you have 3 different servers and landscapes. Now, this guy worked on accounts payable and accounts receivable. This guy worked on asset accounting, asset management, and general ledger. Now, if I want to move my code to a testing environment, I cannot allow these guys to individually push their code into the testers because there will be no consistency. Let us say this guy pushed and, there should be a tickets raised. Whenever there is a defect, there should be a ticket raised. And based on that ticket number, the defect has to be fixed and it has to be redeveloped on the development and be pushed onto the tester. So if you don't have these kind of a standard architecture or a process in which these codes has to be moved, then it will be very difficult for you to ensure the final version of the code. So for that, what we do is, instead of pushing them directly from development to QA, you have something called as a central repository. So we spoke about a local repository where the developers work. Now we'll talk about the central repository. Right, we'll talk about the central repository. So central repository is nothing but a common storage place for all your developers. So every developer can upload their code into a common central repository. Not only that, if you know about the tools called HPQC, and there's one more tool called as it's a web-based tool where you can upload, very generally upload all your project documentation. It is on SAP, it is Solman, Solution Manager, and the other one is called as one second, Salesforce. Right, you need these adapters, right? So these are nothing but your central portals where you can upload your documents, and when you have changes, you do the changes and re-upload. So it will do a check-in and check-out mechanism to ensure that your previous version and the current version is saved, and you can keep a backup of your jobs rather than
like SharePoint, SharePoint.
Exactly. You gave the right word.
Microsoft SharePoint.
Yeah. So Microsoft SharePoint, HPQC, Solution Manager, all these things will allow you to upload your initial draft, and once your initial draft is done, you have some modifications on that, so you can get the document from the SharePoint or from the central folder, do your modifications on that and re-upload that into your central folder so that your previous version and current version is also maintained. And you can go to the common share folder and you can go and look at the history of the documents, right? Which is the first version, which is the second version, and how it is used. So the same kind of mechanism is also allowed in your data services central repository. So let us say this guy works on accounts payable. He uploads that into this one, and this has to be moved to the QA environment. I'll get back to the history in a bit. So in the QA central repository, right, there will be a team called as a code promotion consultants. So these guys, what they do, they actually extract the data from your development and load the data into your QA. So whatever the version this guy confirms, the developer one confirms, or they will get the latest version. So code promotion consultants, we call them as code promotion consultants. So they will be in touch with all the developers, and whenever they upload a code, they get the latest and load that into your QA environment. Now once the code is present in your QA environment, the testers will get the latest one. These guys will notify the testing team saying that this code is moved. So they will get the latest version into their local repository and run the job. So possibility, success, failure, defect, right? So these are the three possibilities that we can get on the data. One is job completed successfully, everything is 100% okay. Now this QA guy will go ahead and give a green signal for this job to move into the production environment. But if there is a failure, which means it is a syntax issue. Your code moved into the QA environment, but there are some syntax issues which needs to be fixed. So what they do, they raise a ticket number for this one. For defects or issues, they raise a ticket number, and they will assign this ticket number back to the developer who worked on these jobs based on their availability. If not, if he is not available, then they will go and assign it to the other guy. But generally, what they do, if there is a failure or a defect, because he is the one who created this job, and he should be in a position to fix that soon. So once these guys, let us say ticket number 1001 is raised for these two defects and issues on these two jobs, and they're assigned to this guy. So this guy will rework on them, and he will upload the code back into your central repository. So this is where you'll get the versions of the job, right? The old version, the new version, and the new latest versions, all different versions will be maintained, and those are also like the testers. Yeah, correct. Yeah, testers. So what these code promotion guys will do, instead of getting the first version, they will go and get the latest version into the quality environment, and these guys will get the latest from the quality, and these guys will run the job, and if the defect is fixed, they'll close, or they will try to open a new defect number if there is still issues or defects with the data, right, till the data owners are satisfied with the data. So they will keep this loop open. Now initially, when I was new to data services 8 years back, I really got offended with one of the tester, because there is only a semicolon missing in the syntax, and he raised a ticket for this, and he asked me to fix it and again push it into the queue, this one, and from here to this one, and from here he imported the job, validated it, ran it. I really got pissed off, I really got irritated, and I went ahead and asked him, like, why can't you just put a semicolon? For that, there is no need for you to do an escalation, raise a ticket, and all these things, because that is a bad mark on my development standards. But the thing is that these guys will not have a right access to the QA central repository. They can only get latest from the QA central repository, but they cannot write anything into the QA central repository. Right? So this is to avoid any malpractices, or this is to ensure that the right quality of job is done. They will not be allowed to do any change. Though they can do any changes, when you want to move it to the production, they cannot push the latest version of their code from their local to central, but the developers can read and write the code from the central repository. So that is the advantages. Testers can only read the code from the quality central repository. Now, in this cycle, finally all the defects are fixed, and the final version of code is present here, and this code promotion guys will get the latest version from this and load it into the QA central repository. And now this code has to be moved into your production environment. Right, again you'll have a production central repository, right, and the code promotion guys, once the testers go ahead and gives a green signal for this guys to move the code. So what they will do, they will move this code, a defect-free code, into your production environment, right, accounts payable 3, right, and this production support people, what they will do, they will get the latest version from this one and schedule their jobs so that they run as per your schedule. So initially they will do a full load, and after that they will schedule your jobs, right? So these guys will never have an access to write back into their central repositories. Only you can do a read and write into your central repository only in your development environment. So this is your multi-user instance or a multi-user landscape where you'll have the administrators, testers, developers, production support, code promotion, and everybody will have their own local repository, and there will be a central repository too in the development, in QA, and in the production environments. Right, so this is how you build your central or multi-user instance. And one more thing is, initially when you get into the projects, not every developer will get a non-data disclosure agreement. We call this as NDAs. Only the admins, architects, or the project managers, they sign these documents with customers, non-data disclosure agreements, and they get a username and password to their source databases, target databases, staging databases, and as per the project policy, you're not allowed to share your credentials with the rest of your team. So what these admins will do, they will create these data stores in their local repository and upload that into the central repository. So they will create their data stores in the local repository and upload these data stores into the central repository so that all the team members, right, they can get the latest version into their local repository. So without knowing the username and password, they can still use these data stores, which means these data stores are created by developer and they are pushed into a common storage. So without knowing the username and password, they can just download them from the common storage and start building their jobs. So that is one way you can abide by the policy. You can save your environment, save your policies, and save your data interest with the customer. And again, you still share your credentials or connectivities to the multiple team members, and so that they can work on their jobs, right? So this is how your multi-user environment works. So for this, what we need to understand is central repository. How does admins work on this? Central repository, how does developers work on this? And central repository, how does the QA guys or testers work with this? And central repository, code promotion, right? So how does this developers connect to the central repository? How will they upload or download their code? Even before that, how will the administrators create a central repository? How will they say that these are developers, you give them full access, these are testers, you give them limited access, and these are production support guys, you guys give them a scheduling access. So how does the administrators create all these things, right? Create a central repository, give authorizations on that, and then map users to those groups. And after that, how the developers will get latest or add their code into the central repository, get latest, do a check-in and check-out, maintain history, how can they go and look at the history and all these things, right? And as a QA guy, how can you get the latest version into your local repository, right? Or how can you get a specific label suggested by the developer? Now, how do you upload them into your production central repository from the code promotion as a code promotion guys? So these are the different things. So just look at the depth of this subject that we are dealing with. This is to an architect level, right? So I'll be looking at all these things in our subsequent sessions. Probably we might need 2 sessions to complete this activity. Creation of central repository and the creation of groups and authorizations in one, and then the second session we will see how developers work with it, how QA guys work with it, or how a code promotion guys work with it, right? So these are the different things that we'll be looking at your multi-user instance, right? Any questions for today?
Rakesh, one quick question.
Yeah, Vandana.
How much history is it able to handle? Like how many versions it can keep it?
Practically it did not run out of the version so far, and I did not go by that much theory that it will maintain 10 versions or 17 versions. I haven't read anything like that, but yeah, you can maintain multiple versions of the code. It will hold.
I see. And when we, like in the development here, the connection point of view, it's default connection, so which is development, right?
Yeah.
So when the code, promotion, when they move to quality, by default it goes in default connection, so there is no need to change the connections or anything in the multi?
No, they will change. That is one more responsibility of the code promotion consultants. They make sure that, the code is just runnable or user ready when they move from one environment to another. So these guys, the code promotion guys, will change from development to QA data store configurations, and when they move from QA to production, they will make sure that the production configurations are set as default.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rakesh, what is that versions?
See, when you are working on a job, accounts payable. So initial version, you created your job, uploaded that, and there is a defect on this job, or there is a change request on this job. Not every time it can be a defect. There can be a change request on the job. User asks you to add some tables or get data from some other table, map it, and do some changes on your code. And once you're done with this guy says that, no, the previous version is correct. But by the time your local repository, you already changed your code and everything is gone. And if you don't maintain versions in your central repository, your changes will be overwritten in the central repository and you will not have anything left back, right, for you to go and fall back on your previous version. So that is where we'll have the versions of the codes.
So version history depends upon the storage of the space also, right?
Yeah.
Like
so generally, your most complex BODS job will not be more than 2 MB or 3 MB or maximum of 5 MB. So, you can maintain a lot of versions on your central repository.
So if version history increases, then we need to delete some after some time, right?
See, in this 8 years, I haven't seen a scenario that I have to go and delete the previous versions and then get to load the new version. There is enough space on the system. But yeah, if you...
On SharePoint, I faced it.
Yeah, but SharePoint, you always, it points to a backend storage where it has a limited access. But general BODS server configurations, when you're configuring these for the runtime systems or projects, we go ahead with 32 GB RAM. That's the minimum that you suggest for a development instance. And when you go for a QA, you double the gigs, right? 32 plus 32. So that by the time you go into the production, your jobs will be pretty fast, accurate, and they'll run in no time and load the data with a lot of accuracy. So if you want to complicate your jobs in the future with a lot of business rules, or let us say a few more acquisitions happen, few more business units get added up, you add all those things onto your projects, still your jobs will run fast. So that is the idea behind having a powerful backend machines. So Adil's question, what is the usual time frame from moving from development to test and test to production? So, generally it depends on number of objects that you work on this project. Let us say you're working on 5 objects, very small project. So based on the complexity of your job, right, small, medium, and large, right, or simple, medium, or complex. So based on your job's complexity, we promise customers saying that, okay, this can be done in a week's, day's time, or 2 weeks' time, or a month's time. So once your development is done, right, so it also depends on the dependency. Like if your 3 jobs are individual, you can push them directly into the QA one by one, or if your jobs are dependent that only job 2 has to be pushed, then only your job 1 can be pushed. So if you have those kind of dependencies, so you make sure that you push your job 1, job 2 first, and then you go and push your job 1. So these kind of dependencies will also come into picture when you are talking about the code promotions. And if you don't have any dependencies, once your development is done, you move to your QA, run your jobs, and once your QA jobs are done, then you move your code to production and schedule your jobs. That's how it works.
Thank you, Rakesh.
Yep, welcome. Adil, for your question, what are the minimum specifications for the server? So there is something called as a PAM, Product Availability Matrix document, which is available in Service Marketplace, and this is again configured if you are working on your source volume of or volume of data that is present in your source, uncompressed raw data that is present on your source system. Right, it depends on how many gigs you have on your source. You can enter that in the PAM, and SAP has these calculators available on Service Marketplace, which will actually do a suggestion for you, like what is the RAM that is required for this project, and it takes some calculations like what is the maximum amount of data that is present on the table, and how many gigs of data is present from your source to target, and what kind of complex rules that you'll be applying on the data. So based on all these things, we generally used to do a manual effort estimation before, and we used to recommend the server configuration for customers. But now these PAMs are available. We call this as product availability metrics, so you can refer to them, and based on the scenarios or based on the objects that the customer is referring to, you can go and suggest which is the best configuration for him.
Rakesh, do we handle unstructured data using bots?
Yeah, we can. We will look into those scenarios.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Adil says, to summarize, admin creates a data flow, promotes it into the CMC, developer fix it, works on it, moves to code promotion, where so it's not the data flow. So admins generally create the data stores and push them into the central repository, and the developers will get the latest version of those data stores, and based on those data stores, so these data stores are nothing but your connectors, which will allow you to read and write the data from source and target. So once these data stores are available, these guys will go ahead and build their own jobs. Now, there should be one common storage where they can consolidate all their jobs. So they will upload their jobs into that common storage, which is called as a central repository. And once they upload their code into the central repository, the code promotion guys, they will be involved only when you are moving code from one environment to another, from dev to QA or QA to prod.
Is there any third-party tool?
Sorry?
Is there any tool to deploy the total content into the prod or QA, or we can deploy using bots?
No, we actually do that using bots. There's no third-party tool available.
Like in Vivo, we have like lifecycle management, promotion management, right?
Yeah, we can do that in BO because that's actually your ATLs are there or BIRs are there, and you want to move them from one place to another, or you want to upgrade from one version to another. You go with these tools. But data services, you are just moving from one environment to another. You're not doing an upgrade, or you're not doing any other changes on this one, so you can directly with that, because it's not a bulk thing that you'll be doing. As the defects are fixed, you have to move them, right? So there's a lot of manual intervention that is required, and that is where your code promotion guys come into picture.
So code promotion guys are different, normal testing people are different.
Yeah, they are different, but if your development is done pretty fast and you are idle, you can act like a code promotion guy. And your code promotion activity is happening and you are too idle that other people are still working. So what are the jobs that are moved on a one-by-one basis? You can go ahead and run those jobs in the test environment. So it's on how we use your team, right? So it is called as a resource alignment, or a plan that is done in the initial days of the project, saying that, let us say my project needs 50 people. They are not needed from, day one. So I do a resource augmenting and resource alignment plan on the project, saying that initially I need 5, then I need 10, then I need 15, then I need again 5. So this is a ramp up and ramp down model, which will save the customer's pocket as well as the revenue for my company. So customer cannot say, no, I don't need this 20 people right now, or he cannot say that only use 5 people. So it depends on the load of the project. You ramp up and ramp down. So that is where you utilize the team in different roles. So it is just a KT that needs to be given to the team members, like how to work on this one, right? Once it is given, then yeah, we can go ahead and work on different activities.
I have a general question, Rakesh.
Yeah, please go ahead.
As for your experience, what is the future for these boards?
BODS is pretty good, and that is the reason why I'm still on BODS and SAP HANA. I'm certified in BO, BODS, and SAP HANA. So these are my three major areas which I'm working on right now. So definitely, yes, the future is really good, and there's a reason why I'm on this one. And definitely another, 7 to 8 years, you'll have BODS projects going around.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah. All right, guys, thanks for joining today's session. We'll again connect back in tomorrow's session. Till then, take care and have a good time. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye, Rakesh.
Yeah, bye.